Hey guys, welcome back. This is our next set of our systems unit notes focusing on the respiratory system. First, we're going to look at how do all of these model organisms we've talked about throughout this unit do the respiratory system, essentially. How do they breathe? How do they get what they need? Get in oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide. So what's the whole point? Well, it's really what I was just getting to is, they have a need for a gas exchange. We have to take in oxygen and release CO2. And oxygen, why do we need it? Well, we talked about this way at the beginning of the year in our cells and how the mitochondria need oxygen to do this respiration process. The whole point of that is to make this molecule of ATP. And this ATP molecule is essentially the energy currency. This molecule is what's formed and broken apart to do all of your energy functions in your body. So that's why gas exchange needs to occur. We also have to eliminate that buildup product, CO2, and get rid of that from our bodies and take in oxygen, and get rid of CO2. That was the whole point, all the while making ATP. Respiratory systems of our smaller organisms. Notice how we've talked about all these separately throughout. Now we can lump them all together with respiratory systems. Sponges, hydra, planarians, right? So our flatworms. What do? They all do this process for respiration as direct diffusion. Direct diffusion is the most simple process. Think about it. These are all very small organisms. We look at them, under a microscope, the hydra and planaria. You can see these things all with the naked eye, but they're still tiny and kind of simple. And so direct diffusion essentially allows the oxygen and CO2 to cross their cell membranes. So it just goes straight through thin layers of cell membranes from the outside in. This is passive transport. There's no energy needed. That's a great advantage. And think about it, like these types of things don't move a ton, and so they don't expend a lot of energy. And because of that, they're able to get by with just passively moving oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. But remember, this strategy of direct diffusion won't work for something that is big, fast, needs to move a lot, because it just needs more oxygen because it requires more energy. The more energy you use, the bigger you are, right? The more oxygen you're going to need. And direct diffusion just is not going to cut it. How are they highly specialized? They have pore cells. Water can circulate in through them. And then again, the thin cell membranes allow them to diffuse more readily. Something more complex, we look at something like a roundworm, earthworm in our example. You don't look at those guys and say, hey, they look really complex creatures, but they, again, really are and have some good systems that have some structure and complexity to them. So the earthworm is able to do this cutaneous respiration. So we can dissect our earthworms, we can see inside, there's clearly no lungs in there, so how do they breathe? They have an intestine, a mouth and all this stuff, but there's no lungs. So how do they get oxygen if they need it? They do cutaneous respiration. So it's similar to direct diffusion, only there are these blood vessels below the surface of the skin, and the gases go through the skin into the blood vessels, and that's how we get gas exchange to occur. This can also occur with other organisms like leeches, which are similar to our earthworms, and then even something less similar, but a frog can do cutaneous respiration too. Now, frogs have lungs, but they're small, kind of underdeveloped looking things, and they're not going to be enough for an adult frog to function properly and get enough oxygen in there. So they do cutaneous respiration too. Think about it. The skin is very thin. There's moisture in the skin, which is a key structure. They have to be moist. Allow the thin skin or wrinkled skin allows the surface area to be increased. More surface area is more oxygen coming in, more getting in the bloodstream, getting rid of more CO2. So increasing surface area is really key. They also have cilia. Cilia can kind of help for a lot of things, but to help to kind of like move water and other things throughout the organism system. More complex structures, we look at crayfish. So crayfish lungs, or crayfish gills would be the next thing, or fish in general have gills. And so we're just kind of talk about these gills as a way of breathing. A little more complex than cutaneous respiration or direct diffusion. Basically, the overall process is to take the these two cavities, the water outside and the water inside, and just kind of draw that across the lungs. So the water outside in the environment has oxygen in it, goes through the mouth, gets pumped out the gills, and in doing so, the gills are able to extract oxygen from that water and then take that into the organism's bloodstream. Inside the gills, if we were able to zoom in here, we would be able to see all these blood vessels able to extract the oxygen. Crayfish a little different. The gills are kind of C-shaped and feathery. If we could zoom in a little bit, and this is one we typically look at in class, you can kind of see that they're really kind of feathery and branched out. And these are internal gills. Both of these are examples of internal gills, that they're feathery and allows for more surface area. Again, more surface area, more ability to take in oxygen, more ability to release CO2. Grasshopper or an insect. Insects tend to use tracheal tubes as a method of respiration. Basically, the gas exchange occurs through the spiracles, which are the holes right here. You can see the spiracles. Oxygen can enter through, CO2 can enter out. Again, they don't have complex systems like lungs, but we have this tracheal tube or trach tube system where they're basically just this kind of long tube that moves throughout the center of the body. It only works for smaller organisms because there's not really a complex system here, but it's just a way of air entering from the outside through the exoskeleton, which prevents water loss and keeps them, from being like a crispy little grasshopper. But also there needs to be these tiny holes to allow gas exchange. Otherwise, they don't have a good way of getting in there because they don't have these lungs and other structures. So the trachea is the long tube. Up here, you can see it kind of runs throughout, and then the spiracles connect to that. And that's essentially how the tracheal tube works. The respiratory system has external gills as a kind of an offshoot of your internal gills. Not too many creatures have these things. Some amphibians and larval fishes, you can kind of see, here's a good example of an external gill. They work the same way, really, kind of as those internal gills, only they're able to extract the oxygen without taking it in through their mouth, just directly from the environment. However, you can see that there's some limitations. They need to be moving. If they're not pumping water across and the animal needs to move, the tissue can be damaged. So if there's a predator or they hit it on the environment somewhere, that could also become an issue for them. Real quick, just take a moment to make a plant connection. How do plants exchange gases? We know plants don't have lungs. So how do they do their gas exchange? First off, remember that they're getting rid of oxygen, which we take in because they're doing photosynthesis, right? So we want to, in gas exchange, they're getting rid of their oxygen. They're taking in carbon dioxide. How do they do that? Well, these plant cells, if you look at them closely under a microscope, have these small little holes in them. And you can see that these tiny holes, these stoma or stomata as a plural, all right, open and close to help regulate gas exchange through the cells, all right? So these are just specialized structures. They're made up of guard cells. They have chloroplasts also, but an open stoma and closed stoma, they have the ability to open and close, regulate gas exchange. So a pretty cool adaptation and a way to make plant connections here.